Welcome into the PFF NFL Daily, and it's a bit of an emergency NFL Daily as the Denver Broncos have fired head coach Nathaniel Hackett. We are just 16 weeks into his career as the head coach of the Denver Broncos, so that's over. So this just in: Hackett is out in Denver, coming off a 51-14 victory loss yesterday to the Rams. Pretty embarrassing, pretty bad. And as we mentioned on the PFF NFL podcast today, Sam, really a low for a season of lows for the Denver Broncos. So your initial reaction to Hackett being fired?
Yeah, it's not surprising. That game against the Rams, it's the kind of game that gets people fired. You know what I mean? Like, you can lose at the NFL, you can lose quite a lot at the NFL level, but if you're playing hard, if everybody's fighting, if everybody's trying to win, if everyone's on the same page, you can get by a lot of those. Once things start to unravel the way they did against the Rams, where immediately it goes bad and it just everyone gave up. Like, at that point, that's the kind of loss, that's the kind of performance, that's the kind of embarrassment that gets people fired. And, for Nathaniel Hackett, it was a coaching tenure that started badly, tailed off in the middle, and the less said about the end, the better. I mean, that's just one of the worst head coaching tenures in NFL history. And he was kind of the obvious fall guy once it became clear that something significant needed to change.
It's not worse than Urban Meyer. I know that. It's not worse
Just
than
about.
last year's.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing, right? Nathaniel Hackett, he's an offensive coach. So the couple things at a high level here. Offensive coach paired with Russell Wilson, for whatever you think of Russ right now, at one point was a very, very good quarterback, right? With a Hall of Fame type of trajectory to his career. We'll see what happens now. But that hasn't worked out. The offense has been just a train wreck. Russ looks terrible. Everything about the offense looks bad. But as you mentioned, it started out poorly, right? It started out on Monday Night Football against Russ's old team in Seattle. Clock management issues, settling for a 64-yard field goal or whatever it was at the end of regulation instead of going for it on 4th and 5. Just a million things went wrong early on. And it got worse from there, frankly. And as you said, it kind of culminated in this game where the defense had been playing hard, keeping them in it, and it just feels like there's people fighting on the sidelines. The defense didn't want to play. The offense is still terrible. Everything's bad. So, look, we can look back at Hackett and what went right or wrong. I think at a high level, offense being bad and just general control of the program, right? That's an issue. And but like, what are they gonna do offensively? That's going to be our next question going forward.
Yeah, and remember, the team has changed ownership since everybody got hired or since all the moves have been made, right? So this ownership is not tied to any move that's been made in the past, with the exception of the fact that Russell Wilson's giant contract is stuck. They can't change that. That's one they are saddled with. But in terms of cutting your losses or making a move that needs to happen or changing people in positions of power, the new ownership group isn't wedded to that at all. And by the way, are rich enough that they can buy out anybody they want to, right? So if they came together after that game and were like, okay, something major needs to change, what are we going to do? Well, step one, the quarterback can't change. His contract is, we're stuck with it. So someone's getting fired, right? And if someone's getting fired, it's probably going to be the head coach before it's the GM. And I think that's basically the quick zero-sum math that they made at the end of this.
Yeah, you can't buy yourself out of QB contracts, though. So that's going to be the issue here, right? So, all right, so let's go back here. They hired Nathaniel Hackett. The idea was that he was supposed to draw Aaron Rodgers. They tried. They lure Russell Wilson. I don't think, all the revisionist history in the world, I don't think anybody at the time was like, oh, you idiot Broncos, why would you make this move? It was one of the biggest moves of the offseason. This was supposed to be the missing piece for this team that had a great defense and a really good roster and now needs Russell Wilson. I don't know if this isn't at the level of Urban Meyer, right? I mean, I know I mentioned that earlier, but it was so toxic in Jacksonville. There's just some level of toxic, I would say, in Denver. So there needs to be, just like Doug Peterson comes into Jacksonville, completely changes everything. Whoever comes in has to get the team back on track, the offense and the defense back together, and then ultimately get Russell Wilson back to like just a fraction of what he was before to give the Broncos a chance.
Yeah, it's a different type of toxicity, right? Like, everyone hated going to work in Jacksonville because the head coach was a like an absolute militant dictator and apparently treated everybody like garbage. I suspect a lot of people hate going to work in Denver as well for slightly different reasons. And a lot of this depends what the real truth is behind the scenes and how the whole Russell Wilson attitude and whether he has his own office and sort of distances himself from everybody else, like how that dynamic really functions. But right now, I suspect everyone else in Denver hates going to work as well, because the whole thing is a disaster and there's no sort of accountability for that at the moment.
DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, is my go-to when betting on the NFL this holiday season. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 on any NFL team to win their game and get $150 in free bets if they do. Check it out. Right now, everyone can earn up to 100% boost with DraftKings stepped-up same-game parlays. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app, place a same-game parlay, and combine multiple bets like which team will win, player props, point totals, and more. The more legs you add, the bigger the boost, the bigger your shot to win big. So download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use code PFF. Place a $5 bet on any NFL team to win their game, and you get $150 in free bets if they do. It's only at DraftKings Sportsbook with the code PFF. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details. All right, Sam, I've said a few times, whoever the next guy is, they need at least an offensive coach in there that has ties to Russell Wilson. Is that true? I'm only down that path because we always heard the stories coming out of Seattle. You got to know how to handle Russ. You got to manage him a certain way, call a game a certain way, and all that stuff. I'm assuming Denver wants somebody with experience getting to Russell Wilson, getting the most out of Russell Wilson, both from a play calling standpoint and then just generally getting along with him off the field as play caller.
I feel like that's too simplistic and maybe silly. Like, I think the back, like the foundation of it makes sense, right? Like, you're stuck with Russell Wilson. Whoever comes in has to have some kind of solution to fixing what's wrong with the current offense. But I don't think it necessarily means that's just a guy that had some kind of success with him in the past. I think that just means whoever is going to sell themselves as the head coach or offensive coordinator, the offensive mastermind in Denver, needs to come into the interview with a pretty extensive game plan for how this is going to work. Like, my only questions, really, if I'm the ownership group or whoever it is that's leading this coaching search, is explain to me how you're going to fix what is currently wrong with Russell Wilson in this offense. Like, lay it out for me. And the most impressive plan, the most impressive PowerPoint presentation is going to take the job effectively.
The Saints fans, every time there's a coach opening, their ears perk up because they still have Sean Payton under contract and they're waiting for teams to just throw draft picks at them. That would be an interesting matchup, right? I mean, Sean Payton's talked about grabbing Vic Fangio as defensive coordinator. He was just the head coach in Denver. I don't know if that's how it would end up, but
doesn't feel
Payton,
like it.
Russell Wilson. The Broncos also don't have a first-round pick to throw at the Saints, so kind of complicates things. But I don't know if you have anybody in mind or anything. I am admittedly oversimplifying the idea of getting someone who's worked with Russell Wilson, Darrell Bevel, or Brian Schottenheimer, or whoever it's been. And I realize all of those guys had these bouts in Seattle where they felt like they were too conservative and they could have done more or whatever. But in hindsight, they know this deep play action game and what Russell Wilson can do. The bigger issue with it, though, might be what we talked about on the PFF NFL podcast today, which was if he's not as athletic as he was before, if he can't break the pocket at the same level, Russ has to change his game. I don't care who you bring in, right? You can bring in Bill Walsh. Russell Wilson has to be able to adjust his game as he gets into his 30s and he's not as explosive and as athletic as he's been.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, there's a real chance that this is a poison chalice of a quarterback or of a head coaching job right now, in that there might not be a fix to Russell Wilson. Like, as much as we're like, hey, go back to the guys that worked with him in the past, these are guys who, remember, if you go back to the time, were kind of generally crapped upon as seeing, that you're holding him back. Like, you're causing the problems in Russell Wilson. Now, maybe with hindsight, and we sort of flip that dynamic and go, actually, they were kind of helping him and they understood the limitations. The point being, there were still limitations when Russell Wilson was playing at his best, and now he's playing a million miles from his best. So now almost all you're left with is limitations. I feel like whoever comes in might be on a hiding to nothing. The whole thing is still a disaster next year, and then they blow it all up, right? Like, at the end of next year, you're getting rid of Russell Wilson. You're eating like 100 million of dead cap space. and then the head coach is stuck with no quarterback and no roster because $100 million in space is eaten up with the guy you're trying to get rid of. So if I was a head coaching candidate, I would either want a very long amount of guaranteed years on my contract to make sure that I wasn't like a one and done fall guy, or I'd want to be very confident that I actually could get something different out of Russell Wilson going forward. So that's, I think, a real issue.
We'll have plenty to talk about this offseason with Russ, but the immediate reaction, hey, Nathaniel Hackett fired. And as much as we might say he lost control and whatever, it'll be interesting to see if Russell Wilson can regain control of that locker room as the leader that apparently nobody really has faith in at the moment. So a lot more with this Broncos situation. Nathaniel Hackett, though, is out after 16 weeks as Denver Broncos head coach. It's the PFF NFL Daily.